Imagine waking up one morning and finding a massive fence built around your property, locking you inside your own land. No warning, no permission, and worst of all, the only key belongs to the very people who want to control you. That's exactly what happened to Marcus, a rancher who was trapped by his own HOA. But instead of giving up, he turned their trap into the biggest mistake they ever made. Because in the end, Marcus didn't just win his freedom, he became the man who owned the only way in or out of the entire community. 1. Trapped on his own land. Imagine this. You wake up on a sunny morning, stretch your arms, and get ready to step outside for a new day on your ranch. The birds are singing, the air is fresh, and everything feels peaceful. Until you notice something strange. Right there, surrounding your property, is a tall fence. Not just a small wooden fence to mark boundaries. No, this is a massive steel fence, running along the edges of your land like prison bars. That's exactly the nightmare Marcus woke up to. Marcus was a hard-working black ranch owner. He had spent years of his life saving money, planning, and finally building a peaceful home away from the noise of the city. His ranch wasn't just a place to live. It was his pride, his safe haven, the place where he poured his energy day after day. He had livestock to take care of, land to manage, and a dream to live out. But one morning, that dream felt more like a cage. The strange thing was Marcus hadn't built that fence. He hadn't asked for it, and he definitely hadn't agreed to it. So, who did? The answer came soon enough. It was the local homeowners association, or HOA. For those who don't know, an HOA is a group that manages neighborhoods and communities. They make rules about how houses should look, how lawns should be cut, and even how people should behave in their own neighborhoods. Sometimes they're helpful, but more often, they're known for being strict, demanding, and power-hungry. Marcus never signed up for their control. His ranch had been there long before the HOA even existed. But that didn't stop them. They claimed they were improving the area by building a gated community, and in the process, they built a fence that completely surrounded Marcus's land. On paper, they called it progress. In reality, it was a prison. Imagine the frustration. This was Marcus's land he paid for, land he worked hard for, yet suddenly he couldn't come and go freely. Every time he needed to enter or leave his ranch, he had to go through a gate. And guess who controlled that gate? Not Marcus, not his family, but the HOA. The message was loud and clear. We own the gate, we control the key, and if you want access, you'll play by our rules. At first, Marcus thought there must have been some mistake. Surely no one would just trap a man on his own land. But the truth sank in quickly. The HOA knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't building that fence for safety. They were building it for power. Marcus knocked on doors. He asked for explanations, but all he got were cold stares and dismissive answers. It's for the good of the community, they said. Everyone has to follow the same rules. But Marcus knew better. He wasn't everyone. He was the outsider, the man they didn't think belonged in their neat little gated neighborhood. And that's when the anger started to build. For Marcus, the ranch wasn't just property. It was his history. His family had worked that land, his sweat was in that soil, and now some group of people with clipboards and meetings thought they had the right to box him in like an unwanted guest. He walked the fence line, touching the cold steel. Each step made him angrier. This wasn't a fence, it was a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, there would always be people trying to control him, limit him, and make him feel small. But Marcus wasn't small, he wasn't weak, and he definitely wasn't going to roll over and let them cage him like an animal. He knew he had a choice. He could give in, take the key they offered, pay their fees, and let them dictate his life, or he could fight back. Marcus looked at that gate one more time. The lock clicked shut with a heavy clang, and in that sound, he didn't just hear metal on metal. He heard a challenge. The HOA thought they had trapped him, but what they didn't know was that Marcus was smarter, tougher, and more determined than they could ever imagine. They had built the fence to limit him. Instead, they had just lit a fire inside him. Because Marcus wasn't about to live caged on his own land. He was about to fight back in a way the HOA would never see coming. 2. The HOA's control game. The HOA thought they had it all figured out. They had the money, the lawyers, the rules, and now they had the gate. To them, Marcus was just one man standing against a well-oiled machine. They believed he would eventually break, bend, and fall in line like everyone else. From their point of view, the fence was just the beginning. The HOA installed the gate, they kept the keys, and they expected Marcus to accept it. They assumed he would pay their monthly fees, follow their endless rules, and allow them to control every little detail of his life. After all, that's how it usually worked. People hated the HOA, sure, but most people eventually gave up and complied. But Marcus was different. His ranch wasn't a cookie-cutter house on a suburban street. It wasn't a property stamped out of a developer's blueprint. His ranch was living proof of years of labor. His father had raised cattle there. His mother had planted gardens there. Marcus himself had spent sleepless nights repairing fences, feeding livestock, and making sure the land stayed alive. This wasn't just property, it was legacy. It carried his blood, his sweat, his history, and no clipboard, no monthly dues, and no power-hungry association was going to erase that. Still, the HOA tried. When Marcus asked for a key to the gate, they delayed. First, they said the paperwork wasn't ready. Then they said he needed to sign extra agreements. After that, they claimed the board had to vote on it. Every excuse was another reminder that they didn't see Marcus as part of their community. They saw him as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. On top of that, they started drowning him in rules. They sent letters demanding changes to his ranch. They nitpicked everything. His fence wasn't painted the approved color. His barn was too tall. Even the animals he raised suddenly became a violation of community guidelines. It was intimidation, pure and simple. They wanted him to get frustrated. They wanted him to feel powerless. And more than anything, they wanted him to sell his ranch. Because here was the truth. Marcus' land was valuable, very valuable. Developers had their eyes on it for years. And the HOA knew that if Marcus sold, they could expand their gated community even further. But Marcus wasn't about to give them what they wanted. He had seen their tactics before, people in power using paperwork and rules to box others into corners. He knew if he got angry, if he lost his temper, they'd use it against him. They'd paint him as difficult or uncooperative. They'd twist the story until he was the problem, not them. So Marcus stayed calm. On the outside, he looked quiet. He nodded, he listened, and he let them talk. But inside, his mind was working nonstop. He wasn't planning to fight them with fists or shouting. He was going to fight them with something stronger, knowledge. Marcus began studying everything he could about HOAs. He read their bylaws, their contracts, even the legal fine print that most people ignored. He learned about property rights, about easements, and about how communities were structured. And the more he read, the more he realized something important. The HOA's power wasn't absolute. It wasn't built on fairness or justice. It was built on paperwork, money, and technicalities. They thrived on the fact that most people didn't understand the system. But Marcus was willing to put in the time to learn it and to use it against them. For weeks, Marcus kept his cool. The HOA thought they were winning. They thought he was backing down. But what they didn't know was that Marcus was quietly building a plan. Late at night, after finishing chores on the ranch, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with stacks of documents. He highlighted lines, took notes, and made phone calls. He wasn't just defending himself. He was preparing for a counterattack. Every letter the HOA sent, Marcus kept. Every excuse about the key, he documented. Every demand they made, he filed away. To the HOA, it probably looked like Marcus was just another homeowner slowly giving in. But in reality, he was sharpening his tools. Because Marcus had realized a truth the HOA had forgotten. Power isn't always about who shouts the loudest or who builds the biggest fence. Sometimes power belongs to the person who knows the rules better than anyone else, and who knows exactly how to turn those rules upside down. And Marcus was ready to do just that. 3. Marcus's brilliant move. Weeks turned into months, and while the HOA thought Marcus was quietly giving up, he was doing the opposite. Every night after finishing his chores, Marcus sat down with a notebook, legal documents, and his laptop. He wasn't just reading, he was studying. He dug deep into how HOAs were structured, how property rights worked, and especially where exactly that fence and gate had been placed. At first it seemed hopeless. The HOA looked untouchable. They had lawyers, money, and a history of bullying people into compliance. But Marcus had patience. And patience, combined with persistence, can uncover the smallest cracks in even the strongest wall. One evening, after weeks of research, Marcus noticed something strange in the county's property maps. The gate, the same gate the HOA bragged about, the one they used to control his every movement, wasn't actually on HOA-owned land. It was sitting on a thin strip of property that didn't belong to them at all. Marcus blinked. He double-checked. Then he triple-checked. The records were clear. Somehow, in their rush to fence in the community and trap Marcus's ranch, the HOA had made a huge mistake. They had built their prized gate on a piece of land that wasn't theirs. And even better, this strip of land was up for sale. For a moment, Marcus just sat there, stunned. All the frustration, all the humiliation of being fenced in suddenly turned into possibility. The HOA thought they were untouchable, but in reality, they had built their power on shaky ground. And now, Marcus saw a way to flip the entire game upside down. He didn't tell anyone, not his neighbors, not even close friends. The HOA thrived on gossip and intimidation, and Marcus wasn't about to give them a single hint of what he was planning. He moved quietly, carefully, like a chess player, setting up the final checkmate. The next morning, Marcus made some phone calls. He spoke to the private owner of the strip of land. They were eager to sell. It wasn't much property, just a sliver most people overlooked. To the average buyer, it wasn't useful. But to Marcus, it was the most valuable piece of land in the entire community. The paperwork took time, but Marcus was patient. He didn't rush, didn't draw attention. And then, one afternoon, it was done. The sale was final. Marcus now owned that strip of land. The land where the gate sat, the land where the road ran, the land that controlled the only entrance and exit to the entire community. And with that purchase, everything changed. For years, the HOA had tried to box Marcus in. They controlled the key, they controlled the rules, and they believed they controlled him. But now the tables had turned in the most dramatic way possible. Because Marcus wasn't just the owner of his ranch anymore. He was the owner of the only way in or out of the neighborhood. And along with that came something priceless, the only gate key that truly mattered. Think about the irony for a moment. The HOA had spent thousands of dollars building a fence and gate they thought gave them control. But because of their arrogance and poor planning, they had actually handed the ultimate power to the very man they wanted to cage. Marcus didn't announce it right away. He let the truth sit quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal what he had done. But inside, he felt a calm strength he hadn't felt in months. He had been patient, he had been smart, and now he had turned their trap into his victory. Neighbors who once ignored him still drove through the gate every day, completely unaware that the very road they depended on was no longer under the HOA's authority. It belonged to Marcus. The power dynamic had shifted, and no one even knew it yet. That night, Marcus walked out to the gate. He placed his hand on the cold steel, the same steel that once made him feel trapped. But this time, he smiled, because now that steel didn't represent a prison. It represented freedom, ownership, and poetic justice. The HOA had written him off as powerless, but with one smart move, Marcus had become the most powerful man in the entire neighborhood. The man they tried to fence in was now the man holding the only key. Or, tables turned. When the truth finally came out, it spread like wildfire. One phone call led to another, one conversation in the neighborhood turned into 10, and before long, everyone knew. The HOA, the group that had built the towering fence, the gate, the rules, and the pressure, had made a colossal mistake. The gate, their crown jewel of control, wasn't theirs anymore. It was Marcus's. At first, people didn't believe it. How could one man outsmart an entire HOA? How could someone they tried so hard to push out end up holding the one thing they all depended on? But it was true. The paperwork was legal, the property records were clear, and Marcus's name was right there on the deed. The same gate they had used to trap him now answered only to him. The HOA, once smug and confident, suddenly found themselves powerless. And it didn't take long for panic to set in. For years, Marcus had been the one knocking on doors, asking for a key, asking for fair treatment. Now the roles were reversed. Residents who once looked down on him, ignored him, or whispered about him were now knocking on his door. They needed him. They needed his permission to use the road, to pass through the gate, to reach their homes. It was poetic justice. Marcus could have chosen revenge, and honestly, no one would have blamed him. After all the humiliation, the intimidation, and the outright disrespect, he had every reason to lock the gate and leave the HOA scrambling. He could have denied them access, charged them outrageous fees, or simply closed the gate to watch them squirm. For a moment, he even imagined it. The sight of the HOA president stuck outside, red-faced and fuming, while Marcus casually strolled past with the only key. But Marcus wasn't that kind of man. Instead of letting anger guide him, Marcus chose wisdom. He realized he now had an opportunity far greater than revenge. He could use this power not to humiliate his neighbors, but to teach them respect. The first thing Marcus did was set the record straight. He called a community meeting, and when the HOA tried to run it, Marcus calmly interrupted. He laid the property documents on the table for everyone to see. The room went silent as the reality hit. The land under the gate and road belonged to him, not the HOA. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of every injustice he had endured. "I am not here to shut you out," Marcus said. "I'm not here to make your lives miserable, even though you tried to do that to me. All I ask is simple: respect. No more intimidation, no more discrimination, no more games." The silence in the room was almost deafening. For the first time, the HOA board wasn't in control. For the first time, they were the ones being told what to do. Marcus laid down clear rules. If the community wanted continued access through the gate, they had to treat him with fairness and dignity. No more harassing letters, no more trumped-up violations, no more acting like his ranch was theirs to control. Some residents grumbled, some were embarrassed, a few were even angry. But they had no choice. They couldn't bully Marcus anymore. They couldn't threaten him. Because the simple truth was, without him, they couldn't even get home. It was a complete reversal of power. The HOA, once the enforcer, had become the beggar, and Marcus, once treated as an outsider, now stood as the gatekeeper, literally and figuratively. But what made this story powerful wasn't just that Marcus won, it was how he won. He didn't scream, he didn't fight dirty, he didn't stoop to their level. He used patience, intelligence, and dignity to flip the entire situation on its head. That's what made the lesson sting even more for the HOA. They had tried to strip Marcus of his dignity, but he ended up showing them what true dignity looked like. They had tried to make him feel small, but in the end, his actions made him larger than life. The tables had turned completely, and everyone in that neighborhood knew it. Marcus wasn't just fighting for his own rights anymore. He had become an example, a living reminder that no one should ever be bullied on their own property, no matter how powerful the opposition seems. And every time the residents drove through that gate after that day, they were reminded of one thing: respect isn't demanded with fences or rules, it's earned. 5. The legacy of the gate. Time has a way of softening hard edges, and that's exactly what happened after Marcus's stunning victory. In the beginning, the HOA was furious. They called emergency meetings, brought in lawyers, and searched for loopholes. They wanted their power back. But no matter how hard they tried, the truth was simple. The land under the gate belonged to Marcus, and nothing they did could change that. Slowly, the fight drained out of them. What was once arrogance turned into reluctant acceptance. The HOA, which had strutted around with clipboards and confidence, was now forced to sit down with Marcus as equals. They had no choice but to negotiate. And in those negotiations, something important shifted. For years, the HOA believed community meant control. They believed that respect could be demanded with fines, rules, and fences. But now, with Marcus sitting across the table, they were confronted with a very different truth. Real community is built on respect, not intimidation. At first, the neighbors were awkward. People who once avoided eye contact with Marcus now had to face him directly. Some were embarrassed by how they had treated him. Others, who had whispered behind his back, suddenly found themselves mumbling apologies. A few even admitted that they admired how he had handled the entire situation. And Marcus? He could have turned those apologies into weapons. He could have reminded them of every cruel word, every cold stare, every time they had treated him like an outsider. But Marcus didn't. Because Marcus didn't buy the gate for revenge. He didn't go through all the research, the paperwork, and the planning just to gloat. He did it for something bigger, for dignity, for fairness, for the principle that no man should ever be caged in on his own land. Instead of holding grudges, Marcus showed grace. He accepted apologies, not because the neighbors deserved it, but because he deserved peace. He had carried the weight of their discrimination long enough, and now it was time to put it down. The story of Marcus Gate began to spread far beyond the community. Local newspapers picked it up, bloggers wrote about it. Soon it became more than just a neighborhood dispute. It became a legend. People told the story not just because it was dramatic, but because it carried a lesson. It wasn't just about property lines or fences. It was about standing up to injustice with intelligence, not violence. It was about showing that even when the odds are stacked against you, there is always a way forward if you're willing to think smart and stay patient. Marcus's story proves something powerful, that determination and strategy could defeat arrogance and control. The HOA had thought of themselves as the unbeatable system, but Marcus reminded everyone that systems are only as strong as the people who stand up to them. Over time, the gate itself became a symbol. Residents drove past it every day, but they no longer saw it as a tool of control. They saw it as a reminder that no one should underestimate the quiet strength of a man protecting his home. A reminder that power without respect always collapses. For Marcus, life on the ranch returned to peace. The animals still needed feeding, the fences still needed mending, and the land still required hard work. But there was a new calm in his steps, a new confidence in his spirit. He had faced down a powerful association not with fists or fury, but with patience, intelligence, and courage. And he had won. Sometimes late at night, Marcus would walk out to the gate. He would rest his hand on the steel, remembering how it once felt like a prison. Now it felt different. It felt like victory. Not just his victory, but a victory for anyone who had ever been pushed down, ignored, or bullied. Because this wasn't just his story. It was a story that belonged to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. So the next time you hear about an HOA flexing its power or a group trying to box someone in, remember Marcus, the rancher, who refused to be fenced in, the man who turned a trap into a triumph, the man who didn't just fight for land, but for dignity, the man who, in the end, held the only key. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful tales like this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story.